Ruthless Compassion is a podcast about people who've turned their emotional shit into fertilizer for success. It's about seeing our darkest moments as opportunities for growth and transformation. Marion Nestle is the Paulette Goddard Professor of Nutrition, Food Studies, and Public Health Emerita at New York University. She teaches and writes about food politics, the role of the food industry in food choice, and how the coronavirus pandemic affects food systems. Welcome, Marion Nestle, to the Ruthless Compassion podcast.
I'm glad to be here.
Well, I'm very excited about having you here because food has always been something very, very exciting and interesting to me. I've been very interested in nutrition and health and food. And so this subject of food politics that is your, avenue of interest is very, very fascinating to me. So the first thing I wanted to do maybe is have you introduce yourself to the listener and just kind of give a little thumbnail of what you do.
Oh, I'd be happy to. I'm the Paulette Goddard Professor of Nutrition, Food Studies, and Public Health at New York University, where I've been for more than 30 years. And I'm Emerita. I retired in 2017, but I'm still teaching. I teach classes on food policy and politics, and taught classes this year on food policy and politics in the coronavirus era. I write books about food politics, run a daily blog at foodpolitics.com, and, tweet it out and that sort of thing. But I'm still pretty active professionally, even though I'm officially retired.
Yeah, these days retirement has a whole different meaning, doesn't it?
It just means they don't pay you anymore.
It's true. Oh, my. Well, I wanted to ask you, because it's such an interesting niche, food politics. How did you get into this subject?
Well, I've always been kind of interested in politics, and I was trained in basic science. My doctorate is in molecular biology. And when I was on my first teaching job at Brandeis University, I was given a nutrition course to teach. And the way I describe it, it was like falling in love. I had been teaching cell and molecular biology to students who found it just terribly abstract. And I could see right away that teaching about food and nutrition would be just a wonderful way to teach undergraduate biology, that students could really relate to it and would love it as I did. And I've never looked back. And then right from the beginning, because I was starting to teach at a time when Francis Moore Lappé had just written Diet for a Small Planet, Linus Pauling had written Vitamin C in the Common Cold, and the Center for Science and the Public Interest had just started. And they published a book called Food for People, Not for Profit, that had articles in it about various food and nutrition topics. It could have been written yesterday. The issues are still the same. They're the same issues more than 50 years later. And so I was teaching about nutrition and food with introducing the political, social, environmental context in which we were making food choices right from the beginning. I was recently asked to write something about the trajectory of my career. It didn't really have a trajectory because I started out with the same views that I have now. I mean, some things have changed, but they're very minor. The basic principles haven't changed at all.
Yeah, I definitely can see where you're coming from. So let's dissect this concept, food politics. What actually is food politics?
Well, that's interesting. It's the first question I was asked when my book Food Politics came out in 2002 was, what does food have to do with politics? It's hard to know where to begin. First of all, food is a big business. It's everybody eats, everybody is buying food. It's trillions of dollars in the United States alone every year on food. Food companies have to sell their products in a food environment in which, in the United States, we have about 4,000 calories available a day for every man, woman, and little tiny baby in the country. That's twice what we need. So the food industry then has to be extremely competitive in order to sell its products. It's got two choices. You either buy this product instead of that one, or you eat more in general for them to keep going. And they're mired in politics because Wall Street expects food companies, like every other company, not only to make a profit, but to grow their profit every 90 days. And the pressure on food companies to do that is intense because we have twice as much food available in the country as we actually need. So they're trying to sell their products in a very overheated environment. And to do that, they have created many ways of selling food and protecting their interests that are just mired in politics. And then politics also comes in the main food-related problems that we have in society. Not having enough food, having so much food that we gain weight and are at higher risk for chronic diseases like type 2 diabetes, heart disease, cancers, and now COVID-19, same kind of relationship. And the role that agriculture plays in climate change, which is intense. Some foods have a bigger impact on climate change than others. Beef, for example, has the highest greenhouse gas emissions associated with beef production than any other food that we eat. All of these things have political ramifications, mainly because food companies are trying to protect their bottom line and keep their stockholders happy. If we didn't have the kind of investment system that we had, we would be able to have a much more sensible food system. But as it is, it's heavily politicized.
Right, like everything these days. So you said that, okay, there's about twice as much food being produced as people actually need. Why couldn't people just produce half as much as they're producing? Like, why do they need to keep producing, 4,000 calories worth for every man, woman, and baby in the country? Like, why can't they just cut back on their production?
Well, because if you hit a food product right, you make a lot of money off of it. This is about money and following the dollar. It's also about federal policies that support the overproduction of agriculture. The most obvious example is federal subsidies for corn and soybean production. These are commodities that are grown largely to feed animals or to produce ethanol. This isn't about food for people. This is about indirect food for animals and direct fuel for automobiles. 40% of United States corn production goes to ethanol for cars. Get your head around that one. I certainly can't. So there's a lot of money in it, and the government incentivizes. The main result of federal subsidies for corn and soybeans is to encourage producers to grow more of them. And so the incentive system is to produce more and more food. It used to be justified by saying that we would feed the world. That's obviously not true. So you don't hear that so much anymore. But it's just the way the system was set up. It wasn't a system that was set up to protect small farmers, to protect the environment, to grow food under agroecological principles, and to make agriculture promote public health. That had nothing to do with it. It was just about making money.
Money, right?
Well, yes.
So your new book is called Let's Ask Marion, What You Need to Know About the Politics of Food, Nutrition, and Health. So I was thinking maybe I could ask you some questions apropos of that.
Sure.
Some very specific questions. Alrighty. So there's a couple of things that I think about these days. Well, more than a couple, but I'll see how much time we have. So the first question is, there's a lot of so-called healthy foods that maybe aren't so healthy these days. Like everyone says fish is so healthy, but everyone also saying that fish is full of toxins right now. So what is your take on eating fish?
Everything in moderation. Fish, in my book, What to Eat, which came out in 2006, I described fish as the Wild West of the supermarket. You really don't know what you're getting. And fisheries or wild fish are greatly overproduced. I was just sent yesterday a genetically modified salmon, which arrived in a great big refrigerated box. And what do I do with this? Cook it and eat it, I guess. I mean, it's hard to know what to say about fish, but in a general rule of nutrition is don't eat too much of one thing. Vary your food intake, eat lots and lots and lots of different kinds of foods. And the probability of getting the kind of nutrients that you need from food is great because foods have different nutrient compositions. And if you mix and match them, you get what you need. And you're not running a risk of getting too much of any one thing. And I feel the same way about fish. Yeah, eat it. Just don't eat too much of it.
Okay, so my next question is sugar. So there's a lot said about sugar. Some people say sugar is the devil. Some people say a little bit of sugar is fine. What's your take on sugar? And I'm talking about white processed sugar.
Well, it doesn't really matter what kind of sugar it is. They're all the same.
All right.
If they have a little coloring sprayed, a little molasses sprayed on them, it doesn't make them any healthier. Sugar has calories. It's empty calories. It's calories, but no nutritional value. Everybody would be better off minimizing their intake of sugar. But unfortunately, it's delicious and it's really wonderful to eat. And so there's always a problem about pleasure versus health. And the general advice, which is to restrict sugar intake to somewhere between 5 and 10% of calories, makes sense to me. It leaves you room for about 50 grams of sugar a day. That's plenty. That's 10 teaspoons, and that's enough. So I'm a sugar in moderation kind of person. I know that a lot of people feel that sugar is poison. And if you're somebody who can't stop eating it, and if you've got sugary products in the house, you're going to eat them all. They better not have it in the house.
Yeah, some people really do get like this addictive reaction to sugar.
They do. And if they do, they need to control it in the ways that you have to control any substance that you think you're addicted to that isn't good for you.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So
I don't know anybody who's addicted to broccoli.
No, it's very hard to get addicted to broccoli, although I love broccoli personally.
I do too.
Now, what about organics? Because there's a lot of controversy about organics. Is what they're calling organic actually organic? And is it that much better for you? What's your take on organic food?
Well, I'm for it. I'm totally for it. Organic production methods are much better for the planet than our conventional industrial production methods. And I think we need agricultural production that is much more concerned about conserving soil, conserving nutrients in soil, conserving everything about soil, and not polluting the environment, and not using harmful chemical herbicides and pesticides that are not allowed in organic production in the United States. In the United States, organics have a legal meaning. There are organic standards that are developed by the Department of Agriculture and presumably enforced by the Department of Agriculture, although there are real questions about the level of enforcement. But the meaning of organic in the United States is extremely clear. It's products that are produced according to the organic standards that are set by the Department of Agriculture, and the places that use the USDA certified organic seal are inspected to make sure that they're following those rules. And to the extent that that system works, it works, and people can trust it. Your question asked whether organics were healthier for people. Well, yes, they don't have any pesticides. How harmful pesticides are to the human body at the amounts currently consumed is a big question. I don't see how they could possibly be good for us. But proof of harm has been very difficult, except in people who have enormous exposures. But I just as soon not have them in my body. I can't believe they do any good. So I'm for organics and willing I can afford to pay the higher price for them. And I'm happy to do that.
Okay. So now I'm going to go to another question, which is genetically modified foods, like your genetically modified salmon.
Fish that I got yesterday. Yes.
Shocking. So what do you make of them? Or like, how would you be worried about them? Would you be concerned about them? Would you say they're fine? Like, what's your take on GMOs?
Well, I'm enormously worried about them for environmental reasons. And also for political reasons, because of the way that the genetically modified crops are done, which is there's this vertical integration between seed development and chemical herbicide development, and they're closely linked. It gives the companies that make these products a great deal of control over the food supply. The seeds are patented. Farmers who can't save seeds and use them again. And there's been a lot of enforcement of farm going along with it. I mean, that whole system, there's something very ugly about it. And also there's increasing evidence for a remarkable amount of harm from the chemicals that are being used with these crops, particularly glyphosate, the herbicide glyphosate, which has been now strongly associated with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And Bayer, the company that bought Monsanto and owns the technology, has been forced to pay billions of dollars in reparations to people who've become ill, they say, because of these herbicides. So it's industrial agriculture at its worst. I don't know how else to put it.
No, that's a good way to sum it up. Yeah.
Why do we need this? When what we really need is a smaller scale, more diversified agriculture that pays much more attention to principles of agroecology, where the nutrients that are taken out of the soil are put back in as natural way possible, and farms are more diversified. I think that would be much better for soil, water, air, and the planet, and probably human health as well. Are genetically modified crops okay to eat? Yeah, I suppose so. I certainly ate that salmon, and I'll let you know if there are problems, but I can't imagine that they would be. It just tasted like farmed salmon. I much prefer wild, but it had the texture and flavor of farmed salmon and the color of farmed salmon. So I'm not so concerned about what it does to human health, except indirectly. I don't think it's good to grow crops this way.
Yeah.
And there's plenty of evidence that it's not good, and there's plenty of evidence that other ways of producing agricultural products are much healthier for people and the planet.
So on that note, I'm going to go to meat. So what's the problem with meat production?
Well, I think there are three. Maybe four. Let me see if I can run through them. Industrial animal production is not very nice to the animals, and it's not very good for the environment. It produces a lot of waste in one place. It's very difficult to get rid of that waste. It smells bad. It pollutes the environment very, very badly. It's tough on the animals. It's not an attractive system. Animal agriculture requires antibiotics for the most part, and most antibiotic usage in the United States is for animal agriculture. That is a system that is making antibiotics for human health less able to function because bacteria become resistant to them. Eating meat has been associated with poor health. Cancers of various types. There's a big argument about that science, but the evidence keeps coming in and keeps coming in and keeps coming in. The industry fights it, but the evidence is there. Less meat would be healthier. And then the last is climate change, where beef is the food with the greatest production of greenhouse gases and the greatest impact on climate change. So for all of those reasons, thoughtful dietary advice suggests eating less meat, not necessarily no meat, but less meat than is currently consumed in the United States. And more agencies that are making dietary advice are coming out with an eat less meat recommendation. How much more is arguable, but the current recommendations are if we halved the amount of meat that we ate in the United States in industrialized countries, we would be doing ourselves a big favor and also doing the planet a big favor.
And the cows would be happier too.
Well, it's hard to know. They end up dead anyway.
Yeah. So let's talk about food distribution, okay? Because what I see is that, a very small number of people have a whole lot of choice about food, and a very large number of people have a very small choice about food and less access to food. So that's obviously politics. What's your take on that?
Well, exactly. You've described the situation. If you're wealthy and educated and live in an area with lots of supermarkets, you have an infinite choice of foods. The example that I love using is blueberries. Remember when you probably don't remember when blueberries used to be seasonal. But I certainly can remember when you couldn't get blueberries except during the season, grown locally. And now we have blueberries in supermarkets 365 days a year. And you can track where they come from depending on what the season is. In the summer, I live in New York. In the summer, you get blueberries from New Jersey. In the winter, you get blueberries from Patagonia. But you get blueberries. They're there, and the price isn't even all that different. It's an astonishing achievement of our modern distribution system, but I can afford them. If I was somebody who could not afford them, the idea of paying $6 for a small container of blueberries, when for $6 I could get foods that have much higher caloric value and could feed my family much more easily on those foods, I would be spending, like many people without much money do, I would be spending my food dollars on what are now called ultra-processed foods, which are foods that are heavily processed, put in packages, have a long shelf life, and don't cost very much because their basic ingredients are subsidized by the government.
So let's talk about these ultra-processed foods because, I would say probably since I was a teenager, I stopped eating that kind of food because I just had a sense that it had to be bad for me. If there's too many things that are not food products in the food, why should I be eating it? But what's your take on these ultra-processed foods?
Yeah, it makes dietary advising really easy. Avoid ultra-processed foods. And there is so much evidence now. What's really, the term ultra-processed is relatively recent. It was really introduced only within the last 5 to 10 years. It was invented by a professor of public health at the University of São Paulo in Brazil. And he defined ultra-processed foods as those the easiest way to explain them is they can't be made in home kitchens because they contain ingredients that you can't buy in supermarkets. They're industrially produced. They contain lots of chemical additives, often lots of added fat, sugar, and salt. They're high in calories, relatively low in nutritional value. They don't look anything like the foods from which they were derived. And there is now, once they were defined, it was possible to do research on them. And there is now the most astonishing amount of research demonstrating that people who typically consume a lot of ultra-processed foods take in more calories, gain weight, are at higher risk for type 2 diabetes, heart disease, cancers, and overall mortality. And there's now a controlled clinical trial that shows that people who are fed ultra-processed foods eat more of them. They like the way they taste. They eat more of them. They don't satisfy in the same way that other kinds of foods do. And so people take in many more calories from them without realizing it. They don't realize how much they're eating. And that's in a controlled clinical trial done at NIH. It doesn't get any better than that. So that makes dietary advising really easy. avoid ultra-processed foods or eat them in very small amounts. And they're very easy to recognize because they have long lists of ingredients or don't look anything like the foods from which they were derived, or in the case of beverages, have sugar and nothing else.
So in this time of COVID, it's probably, harder for people to access healthy, nutritious food. What's going on now with, the politics of food, with COVID added into the mix?
Well, like everything else, it split the society so that for people with money, education, and decent places to live, it hasn't made any difference in the way they eat. For people who are stuck at home, don't have a lot of options, are finding food as their only recourse, they're eating whatever they can and whatever they like, whatever makes them feel good. And there are reports now that people are gained astonishing amounts of weight during the pandemic. I saw one report that said the average weight gain, it seems impossible to imagine that this could be true, but the average weight gain is 29 pounds over the year of the pandemic in one study. And another study showed that the average weight gain was 1.5 pounds a month. That's weight that's going to be very hard to get rid of. It will be very, very hard for people to lose that weight. Think about the freshman 15. This is the COVID 15 or 30. And what's really disappointing about this and difficult about this is that obesity was one of the principal risk factors for COVID-19, obesity and the diseases for which it is a risk factor, high blood pressure, high blood cholesterol, type 2 diabetes, and so forth. So this makes people even at higher risk for these kinds of infections, when what you really want is a population that is much healthier, doesn't have these pre-existing conditions, and are better able to withstand the effects of this truly devastating infection. So you look at it and you think, what are we going to do? I don't know what we're going to do. But I hope do something about the income of poor people so they can afford healthier food.
Yeah, and stop building all these fast food restaurants in poor racialized neighborhoods and start putting in some fresh food stores, which is another political thing, right?
Yeah, that would help. And also making sure that the cost of healthier foods is low enough so that people don't mind paying those costs.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So now that I've asked you all my questions, I want to give you an opportunity. Is there something that really you feel you need to mention? Like some particular issue that has to be spoken about today?
Well, I teach students, and what I'm most interested in is getting students interested in taking action to change the food system to one that's healthier for people and the planet. I've mentioned a number of things that I think could change: the way we subsidize food, the way we produce food, the way we make foods available to people, the way we price foods. All of those are subject to advocacy. They're grounds for advocacy. They're targets for advocacy. And I want to get people involved in politics because that's the only way we're going to change the system.
And I suppose since food is the building blocks for our lives, our health, if we're not well nourished, everything else kind of falls by the wayside, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think food is a great way not only to take care of yourself, but to take care of the planet.
That's a great quote. Is there something that you're specifically working on these days?
Yes, I'm working on a memoir.
Oh.
So, my pandemic project has been to answer questions that I'm asked frequently, like the ones that you asked right at the beginning. Oh, how did you get interested in food politics? What does food politics mean for you? How did you develop the kind of career that you developed? Or what kinds of things are you thinking about? I mean, these are the kinds of questions I get asked all the time. And I thought this would be a great time to start answering those questions in a systematic way. I have a contract with University of California Press for a memoir to come out sometime in 2022. So I'm plugging away at it.
If nothing else, you're awfully prolific. You have a big stack of books to your name. It's pretty impressive.
Yes, I do. It's not that I'm a fast writer. I'm not a fast writer. I'm just a very consistent writer.
Well, yeah,
I write every day.
I think consistency and self-discipline is the secret to success in writing.
It certainly helps me. And one of the ways that it helps me is I do an almost daily blog at foodpolitics.com, where I post once a day, 5 times a week, once a day, during the 5 weekdays, on what's going on in food politics and what interests me. And that forces me to keep up, keeps me writing a little bit every day, even though it's not very much. And also to interact with readers, which is very satisfying.
For sure. So where can people find you if they're looking for you?
Foodpolitics.com.
And so
My life is an open book at foodpolitics.com. It's not only where my blog is, but I also put up my publications so that if you want to read anything I've written, you can pretty well, except for the books, you can pretty well read any article that I've written. The site has a terrific search engine, so students can use it to look up things. I link to the articles. I use it as a online file cabinet. And it's got information about the talks I'm giving, my books, anything you want to know, there it is.
Wonderful. I see that you have an out-of-print book called Feed Your Pet Right. I'm so sad about that because that would be a great book for a lot of people, especially these days.
You're not the only one who's sad about it. My co-writer and my partner, Marion Nestle, and I really want to update that book. It came out in 2010 and it needs an update. And the publisher will not give us the rights to do that.
Funny.
Simon and Schuster, right? Simon and Schuster. We have asked for the rights to revise the book and bring it up to date, and they have refused.
Funny, especially these days that everyone's getting a pet in COVID. Like, it would be a great thing for people to be aware of, right?
Yeah, and it's a book with an unfortunate title, Feed Your Pet Right. It's not really about feeding pets. It's a book about the pet food industry. It talks about feeding pet and what pet foods are, but the pet food market has changed enormously in the last 10 years. And so even though the basic principles in the book still hold, the products that we talked about don't exist anymore. And we haven't talked about a lot of the new products that have come out. But Simon and Schuster really dug in on it. I thought it was really silly of them because they're not going to make any money on this book, one way or the other. And we want to revise it. They don't want to do it. Let us revise it with somebody else. But they said no. You
might have to do a revision and just call it something completely different.
Well, we've thought about that. But there are parts in it that we want to reuse. And I'm not sure we would have the right to do that.
So that's the politics of book writing.
The politics of publishing.
Yeah.
It's really tough. It's one of the reasons why I like writing for academic presses. They're much, much easier to work with.
Yeah.
Because they want to make a profit, but they don't have to make as much of a profit. So the profit motive is a big problem in life.
Yeah, I would say that is probably one of the banes of our existence. It's that money over health, money over love, money over kindness, money over everything.
Over a lot of things, yes. And I'm in a pretty privileged position where I don't need to worry about NYU's retirement plan was excellent, and I don't really need to worry about it. And I'm also not greedy, so I do fine, but it's a problem. And I mean, I want basic, universal basic income for everybody in this country.
Yeah, well, we can have a whole other conversation about that, couldn't we?
I hope we will sometime.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So just before we end, I thought maybe it would be fun. I think you already did a little bit of a call to action, but is there a specific call to action you can encourage the listener to try out?
Yeah, well, my mantra is vote with your fork for the kind of food system that you want. Every time you make a choice of food, you're voting for the kind of food system that you want. But it's also extremely important to vote with your vote and get involved in politics, because that's the only way the system's going to change.
I love that. Vote with your fork and vote with your vote. You can make a poster of that.
Well, I have one, actually.
Of course you do. Well, Marion, I'm so happy that we got to speak today. Just the things that you're interested in are definitely the things that I'm interested in. And I think they're so important. And so many people think of food, as you said, as pleasure, and very few people think of them as nutrition and kind of, based in politics. So I think it's so important that we kind of help people wake up to what's really going on around the food that they're putting into their body.
Great. Well, it's been fun talking to you.
All the best. That was the fascinating Marion Nestle, and I'm Dr. Marcia Sirota. If you like this podcast, please review it wherever you listen, and you can sign up for my free biweekly wellness newsletter at marciasirotamd.com, where you'll also learn about my new online courses and my video series on coping with COVID.